Chapter 1. The decision. You are listening at Novel Full. Audio. Translator. TYZ Editor. Least crunching noises spilled out of Fatty's mouth as he gnawed on the malt candy. The day's austere chilliness was chased away in the dusky afterglow that spilled over the vast land, the incoming breeze as gentle as a feather. Ai Hui wondered if he would remember this day in the future. Have you decided? Fatty asked doubtfully. I have decided, Ai Hui replied. He had long made the decision, and there was no longer any hesitation. Fatty sighed with some envy. He then commented, You don't lose out to those wimpy kids. That would be a disgrace to me. I just can't understand what's so good about fighting and killing. Let's take this money, go back, and live happily for the rest of our lives. Do you know how many people enter the wilderness? 2,000. And only the two of us survived. This money is the price of our lives. If I die, my family can still get the money. If you die. That's why I'm still alive, Ai Hui interrupted Fatty, who had stood up to speak with increasing agitation. Slowly, Fatty lost his distraught expression and calmed down. The opportunity to enter the Avalon of Five Elements did not come easily. Initially, due to Ai Hui's inadequate natural abilities, he hadn't been qualified to enter. However, in the last 3 years, his performance had been exemplary. His ability to maintain composure in complex and stressful situations and his display of courage and determination at crucial moments left an indelible impression in everyone's minds. When he made the request to enter the Avalon of Five Elements, the authorities ultimately gave their approval after consideration. Out of the 2,000 laborers, only 2 survived. Even if it was largely due to luck, it also illustrated the multitude of existing problems. Fatty sat down, disappointed. He was too familiar with Ai Hui's stubbornness. Soon after, however, he came to a realization and perked up once more to sincerely say, Remember to write my name on the compensation payment form. Why benefit others when you can benefit me? Ai Hui did not bother to care about him. He casually pulled a straw of grass from the ground, put it in his mouth, and pillowed his head with his hands as he stretched out, content on the ground. For the past 3 years in the wilderness, his mental state had been stretched to the limit every day. Blood, death, fighting, and killing. It was an ice-cold world where darkness and scarlet melded together. He didn't know how he had endured those 3 years, and he did not want to remember it either. After all, there were no happy memories. The afterglow from the setting sun shone on his body. Feeling warm and snug, Ai Hui's eyebrows naturally unfolded while his steely face gradually relaxed into a state of tranquility. It was so comfortable. As Ai Hui's sun-warmed body loosened up, his mental state followed suit, as though a restrictive fog had been lifted from his mind to dissipate silently into thin air. The warm sunlight and the slightly invigorating breeze contained an uncanny quality that stirred up strange yet familiar memories from deep within his mind. The 3 years. No, not the ones he spent in the wilderness. The 3 years before that, the sunlight and breeze in the swordsman's school had felt just like this. In those days, before the sun had even risen, he would have gulped in a breath of cold air, ready to start cleaning the school that had been remodeled from a worn-out warehouse. After 3 runs of wiping down the entire floor, his body would be warmed up, ready to start in on constructing wooden shelves. Each plank had been collected from the nearby streets and were of different sizes and thickness. As such, one could not complain much about how it looked put together. After constructing the wooden shelves, he began to arrange the swordplay manuals the owner had obtained recently. 1 yuan could buy 10 kilograms of manuals on the market. Paperbacks were cheap, but still more valuable than bamboo strips, while the ones that were bound with iron and had gold covers were a bit more expensive. Though there was a lot of work to be done, there was no one to rush him. In fact, Ai Hui had never been hurried along. He was able to leisurely flip through and peruse the manuals. Occasionally, he fantasized about how well off he would be if he were to live in the cultivation era. He would have sold swordplay manuals until his hands went soft. After arranging the swordplay manuals, he started organizing the various flying swords and treasure swords. At this point, the sun would have risen. Just like now, it would be warm and cozy. The corners of Ai Hui's mouth involuntarily quirked into a slight smile. Even though the flying daggers and treasured swords had lost their spiritual force and were just a bunch of unlit scrap metals, under the sunlight, the beauty of their antiquity would often captivate Ai Hui. Flying swords represented the apex of the cultivation world. For generations, the flying swords had been the favorite weapon of master blacksmiths. There were all kinds of oddities, and they existed in various shapes and sizes. There were all kinds of oddities. Some of the shapes were so weird that people could not even associate them with flying swords. He did not dare to touch those that had rusted too much. If they broke, the owner would scold him again. There was no salary for him, but all his meals were provided. To someone who had led the life of a miserable vagabond for the last 10 years like him, this deal was as beautiful as the sunlight right now. He could not any better words to describe it. The owner was a good man. It was just that his way of handling business was not as good. Would a successful businessman run a swordsman school? Ai Hui had stayed at the school for 3 years. During this period of time, less than 10 people had visited the school. Upon seeing the signboard that hung over the entrance of the school, 90% of the visitors turned their heads and left. In this day and age, were there even any swordsmen left? Other than countless swordplay manuals, treasured swords and flying swords, the swordsman school practically had nothing else. The owner had traveled to various marketplaces that sold rubbish just to obtain these things. Even when he traveled to foreign places to do business, he would buy back a batch of such things. His zeal for swordsmanship was obviously irrational. The transport fees alone was much more expensive than what they actually costed. Naturally, there were times when Ai Hui felt that the owner's pathetic financial power might only allow him to adopt a cheap hobby like swordsmanship. Ai Hui had tried to persuade the owner to switch to bodybuilding, and such. These concepts would at least have more prospects than swordsmanship. The owner flew into a rage and berated him. At that point of time, Ai Hui realized that the owner's business management skills were truly appalling. Guarding a completely empty school, Ai Hui felt that he might as well read and played around with the swordplay manuals. Eventually, he did not become a sword practitioner, but to his perseverance in training, his fighting capabilities improved a lot. His fighting capabilities did attract a few wimpy kids. Due to the owner's incapacity, his business failed and he could not pay back his debts. Eventually, he committed suicide. Ai Hui was saddened by this incident. The owner was a good man, but not a determined one. It was only right for one to pay back his or her debt. The school should be passed on to other people. These were what Ai Hui told himself on the last day when the debt collectors came to confiscate the school. The crude wooden shelves that he made were thrashed to the ground. The swordplay manuals were scattered across the floor. Some of these manuals, the owner had retrieved from distant cities. The sword rack that he had wiped and cleaned every day were stomped to pieces by the debt collectors. According to the owner, that rack used to reside in the abode of a sword expert. The flying sword on it had been used to shed the blood of thousands and intimidate the mighty heroes of the past. The 9-tone sword chime that hung under the eaves was also smashed and fragmented. It, too, had its own lofty history as a noteworthy, prized possession of the 9-tone sword sect in the past. When Ai Hui witnessed these acts, like a terribly wounded wolf that had been pushed to the brink, he lost control and frantically lunged forward. It was just a struggle, yes, and the last struggle he could make. Ai Hui did not know the owner's name. So he found a wooden slab, carved the word owner onto it and used it as the memorial tablet. He used twigs as joss sticks, and burned all the swordplay manuals for the owner. After kowtowing to the tablet, he prayed that the owner would be able to pursue his dream of becoming a swordsman in the afterlife. Covered in injuries, He fixed his gaze on the building that was now in shambles for a long time before turning his back and leaving. He walked through the streets of mottled light and shadow, the sunlight filtering past the uneven roofs of houses lining the pavement. His legs strode forward mechanically as he continued onward in a trance-like state without a goal or destination. Even after a year, the feelings of helplessness and loneliness remained fresh in his mind. He remembered that he felt somewhat cold, his fingers clutching tightly to his shirt that had been washed until it had been bleached of color. Both his hands were plunged deeply into his pockets. The sunshine on that day had been different from today's. The chill had pierced into his very marrow. After walking for an unknown period of time, he finally awoke from his stupor to the feeling of extreme hunger. At that moment, the cold and hungry Ai Hui saw the Avalon of 5 Elements recruitment notice for laborers in the wilderness. Having nowhere else to go, Ai Hui went in. And luckily, he survived. As Ai Hui withdrew from his emotions, he discovered that his body had tensed up involuntarily. He could not help but laugh bitterly in his heart. Such a beautiful moment was once again spoiled by his unpleasant memories. He heaved a deep breath of air and tried his best to uncoil his tensed muscles. By good fortune, he survived the entire 3 years in the wilderness. Only 2 people out of 2,000 men survived. One was himself, and the other Qian Dai, also known as Fatty. The families of those dead laborers would receive a compensation fee, while those who survived were able to receive a large sum of money. In regards to this, the Avalon of 5 Elements was never stingy. Fatty prepared to go home. His family was filled with orphans and widowed mothers, and he had to provide for them. The burdens that he carried far exceeded Ai Hui's. "Fine, I know you're a determined person and will never change your mind. You have a bad temper, along with many other issues like seldom listening to other people's advice. You're not young anymore, and you still behave like this. How are you going to find a wife in the future? Try not to spend too much of your money." Fatty continued to talk incessantly, perhaps because he knew they were going split ways soon. Since he was used to Fatty's irritated grumblings, Ai Hui didn't care. However, the moment Fatty mentioned the word money, he felt a slight headache. Whenever this fellow talked about money, he would rise into a frenzy. Indeed, the veins on Fatty's neck began to pulsate. Ai Hui made a prompt decision and quickly threw a pouch at him and said, "This is for you." Fatty cast a puzzled glance at Ai Hui and caught the pouch with a speed that didn't seem in character with his body size. After he caught the pouch though, his small, beady eyes immediately widened. Using chubby, carrot-like fingers, he whisked open the pouch in an instant. As he glanced inside at the pouch contents, his body fat began to tremble madly with agitation. Ai Hui ignored him and turned his face the other way. Fatty's face when he saw money was horrendous. Fatty rushed over and grasped Ai Hui's arms with a sharp smack. His face was filled to the brim with emotions while tears welled up in his eyes. Upon seeing Fatty's behavior, Ai Hui felt emotional as well. Perhaps he had thought too poorly of him. After both of them had been through so much together, this friendship was rather sincere and deep. Unused to such situations, he wanted to tell Fatty to get lost, but at the thought of their impending farewell, he tried his best to restrain himself and soften his tone. He then shakily said, "I'm alone anyway. There isn't much for me to spend the money on. You're going back to the old territory, and you have a huge family. You definitely need more money than I do. Good brother. You're really my good brother." Fatty choked with emotions as he shook Az Hui's hand desperately. With both his eyes glistening with tears, he then continued, "The Avalon of 5 Elements takes care of your lodging and meals. Since you won't be needing the remaining half of the money, how about you give them to me as well?" He was naive to think too highly of this fellow. Ai Hui's arms, which were grasped by the Fatty, flipped over, gripped the ladder and lightly but forcefully pushed. Like a portly cloud, the Fatty flew out for more than 30 meters before crashing to the ground, causing the surrounding wheat and barley to fly everywhere. Get lost. It felt good to be able to finally speak his mind. Ai Hui brushed his hands lightly, and then cautiously felt for the pouch in his pocket. Fatty had extremely nimble hands, making them difficult to guard against. Meanwhile, Fatty picked himself up, covered in dirt. At that moment, a whistle sounded from the distant assembly camp, and the two became silent. It was finally time for them to part. This would be the last time they met. Ai Hui had to head for the Avalon of Five Elements, while Fatty had to return to the old territory. The rapid descent of the orange sunset elongated their shadows on the ground. Ai Hui, you must survive. Okay. Chapter 2. The Arrival. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Translator. TYZ Editor. Lise Ai Hui carried a threadbare backpack and stood in the crowd with a gloomy face. He was feeling thoroughly terrible. Just now, when he opened his pouch, he'd found all his money gone, replaced by a heap of stones. That wretched Fatty still stole from him at the end of the day. He swore that once he returned to the old territory and saw this fellow, he would beat the hell out of him. Shaking himself out of his daze, he exhaled deeply. He prayed that the Avalon of Five Elements would really provide him with lodging and food like Fatty had said. Otherwise, when they met, he would beat him up with more force. For now, he put the issue of the stolen money aside and focused on what was happening before him. It was still too early for the reporting time, but the induction grounds entrance was already surrounded by students excitedly greeting each other. In groups of 3 or 4, they held animated discussions and asked questions without holding back. After staying in the wilderness for so long, Ai Hui was not used to the bustling scene before his eyes. He was more accustomed to the silence, killings, and dangers that had been his life for 3 years. Back then, his instincts would have gone on high alert at anything within 5 meters of him. However, within his range right now, there were 14 people. He fidgeted restlessly, but it was pointless. He could only try his best to restrain the urge to escape or kill these 14 people on impulse. In the wilderness, an approaching unknown creature would immediately activate the fight-or-flight response in him. Fine, it was the wilderness again. He had already sensed his incompatibility with his surroundings even before entering the induction ground. Taking in a deep breath of air, he forcefully calmed his palpitating heart. He knew that this was a mental barrier that he had to overcome. After a while, he summoned the courage to force his way through the crowd, heading towards the induction grounds entrance. Squeezing through the crowd that pushed against him like torrential currents, Ai Hui was drenched in sweat, his clothes disheveled. Panting hard, he felt that this 50-meter trek was somehow more tiring than walking for 50 kilometers. Upon reaching the entrance, Ai Hui raised his head and gazed up at the towering gate. From a visual estimate, the induction grounds entrance gate was approximately 60 meters tall, giving it an imposing atmosphere. The gate itself was poorly assembled, however, it was made up of pieces of irregular iron panels put together. Its appearance was akin to that of a large, patchy rag that was speckled with rust and riddled with scratches everywhere. In front of the metal gate was a half-meter wide stone slab with a perfectly straight groove slashed across its surface. Years of corrosion had smoothed its corners, and a few droplets of water collected along the edges. Ai Hui stared silently at the gouged slab of stone. Everyone in the Avalon of Five Elements knew the story behind it. Even he knew about it since it was related to swordsmen. It was known as the ultimate defensive line. During the Dark Ages, when the wilderness invaded, this groove that was 1 meter in width and 200 meters in length became the final defensive line in a battle to the death. The last famous swordsman in history sacrificed his life to carry out the most dazzling sword strike to kill the enemy leader, carving out the ultimate defensive line. Inspired by his bravery, the human race tenaciously defended against the invasion and persevered until the opening of the Avalon of Five Elements. They dragged the scrap metal collected from the battlefield to assemble the towering metal gate that stood today, riddled with scars. Eventually, the induction ground was built upon this place by the pioneers who wished for the future generations to remember that dark era and to never forget the purpose behind establishing the Avalon of Five Elements. The sufferings of the individuals would fade through the passage of time, but the memories and legends would pass on from generation to generation. The history behind the induction grounds surely made it a place of utmost importance to the Avalon of Five Elements. The only reason Ai Hui knew about the ultimate defensive line was because of the swordplay manuals that he had arranged back in the swordsman school. Almost all of them that mentioned it praised the strike to the greatest extent, saying that it saved humanity, beginning the chapter of a new era and so on. For those who cherished the legacy of swordsmen, that strike marked the ultimate end of the cultivation era and the beginning of the Avalon of Five Elements. These facts had nothing to do with Ai Hui, however. Even if his job was to arrange numerous swordplay manuals, he'd never thought to revive swordsmanship. That was where the owner was foolish. Because of it, his business failed, he owed a huge debt, and he lost his life. Ai Hui felt pretty good to witness the historical remnant that he had read about in numerous swordplay manuals, but it was tinged with sadness when he thought about the owner. Soon, however, he regained his usual calm. After enduring 3 years in the wilderness, he was used to life-and-death situations. He was not as sad as he used to be over such matters. As long as those who were alive did their best to stay alive, those who were dead would be able to rest in peace. Done admiring the monument, he quickly escaped from the crowd and withdrew to the outskirts. His heart rate returned to normal, and he heaved a sigh of relief. Suddenly, at the corner of his eyes, he caught sight of a familiar figure. Ai Hui's facial expression swiftly sank. With large strides, he lifted his leg and kicked it with lightning precision. Bang! The plump figure flew across the air and plummeted heavily to the ground. Before Fatty could get up, a foot was planted onto his face. "Hand the money over," Ai Hui growled. "It's all gone." Fatty replied without even blinking his eyes. "Whose money is gone?" The threat in Ai Hui's tone grew heavier as he pushed down with more strength. "It's all gone." Fatty said quickly, "I've already sent the money home." "My money." Ai Hui's tone remained composed, but even the most insensitive person could sense the anger surging beneath the facade of tranquility like scorching lava. "I used it to buy a spot for this place," Fatty said with swag, before continuing, "I had no other choice. The application date has long passed, and only money could buy me a spot here. I actually pulled a lot of strings, and your money happened to be just the right amount. You better treat me well. Haven't you heard that debtors are always the bosses? If I die, you won't get your money back." Fatty continued to babble from under his foot. Suddenly, the anger disappeared and with blank face, he stomped his foot ferociously onto Fatty. The surrounding people withdrew their gazes from this scene in disgust. Fatty's body was riddled with dirt and mud. Compared to him, Ai Hui's clothes were presentably clean, but they were obviously washed till the point of losing all color. The backpack that he carried was washed out as well, appearing extremely shabby. With a face entirely covered with muddy footprints, Fatty helped himself up without the slightest sign of guilt or embarrassment. Moving away from the crowd, they sat down. Fatty produced a malt candy from out of nowhere and popped it into his mouth with a crunch. He kept looking around, curiously sizing up his surroundings. "How come you're not excited at all?" Fatty cast a puzzled look at Ai Hui and continued, "Hey, it's the induction ground. Now that we're here, we're no longer laborers. Give it another 5 years, and we can bring our entire families to the Avalon of Five Elements. This is where we can make a huge difference in our lives. Do you know how many people from the old territory would kill to be here?" Ai Hui was too lazy to reply. He then pulled a strand of grass from a nearby pile of weeds and chewed on it. He asked, "You're of which element?" "Fire element." Fatty exclaimed as he squinted his beady eyes. I had no idea that my physique would be that good. All of a sudden, Fatty stopped talking as he realized he had divulged certain information. AI Hui swiveled his head and asked with a doubtful look on his face, your physique is good. The Avalon of Five Elements ruled the induction ground with a firm hand. The people living within the Avalon of Five Elements, regardless of their gender or social status, were required at a certain age to enter the induction ground to study. As for the people from the old territory, as long as they passed the physical test, they would be able to enter as well. Unflustered, Fatty replied, yeah, just a bit more, and I would have passed. My innate capability is way better than yours. Otherwise, even if I wanted to buy my way in, it would have been impossible. With how strict the induction ground regulations are, it wouldn't be easy to enter just with connections. No matter what, he could never let AI Hui catch on to the fact that he obtained a spot through passing the physical test. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to explain the missing money. Fatty reminded himself of this fact repeatedly, remaining calm so as to not reveal anything. Oh, AI Hui replied and withdrew his gaze. His physique was average and far from the basic requirement. It's a pity that we have different elements, Fatty said regretfully. His physique was of the fire element while AI Hui's physique was metal. This meant that they would be separated into different teams. AI Hui agreed with Fatty. They worked well together, especially with the deep level of trust they developed. He could also take care of Fatty if they were on the same team. As if he knew what AI Hui was thinking, Fatty reassured him. Don't worry, no matter what, I'm still a veteran who roamed the wilderness before. How can I be bullied by those wimpy kids? At that moment, a scarlet cloud flew over from the distant skies and landed slowly on the ground, triggering a wave of commotion. Dismounting from the cloud was a well-dressed, handsome young man, causing many young ladies to cry out in admiration. That's extremely expensive. Fatty's gaze was captivated by the cloud in an instant. Envious, he continued, the quality of this fiery floating cloud is excellent. Its color is a bright scarlet. No signs of impurity. Look, doesn't the shape of the cloud look like a burning flame? Well, this fiery floating cloud is of the highest quality. This lad must have come from a very powerful family. I have to find a chance to toady up to him. Upon biting the grass straw to nothing but dregs, AI Hui suddenly missed the times in the wilderness. At least there, the ironback canes could be found. Not only was it sweet, it also lasted longer. Even after gnawing on it for half a day, it would still be chewy. He shot a glance at the fiery floating cloud and then withdrew his gaze. Not only was it eye-catching, it was slow as well, making it the perfect prey in the wilderness. This fiery floating cloud was like a signal. After it appeared, various kinds of strange flying objects flew in from all directions and landed on the plaza before the induction ground. Fatty became feverish with excitement as if he had taken some drugs. A string of words that AI Hui had never heard of started to shoot out from Fatty's mouth. His eyes were very sharp. Not only could he identify those flying objects, he could also name their prices. While listening to Fatty's gibberish, AI Hui's bored gaze scanned the crowd. In the wilderness, it was rare to see such young and tender faces. Everyone there was like a beast, fierce, agile, and dangerous. Meanwhile, the youths here had delicate faces that radiated sunshine and vitality. Their excited looks were filled with hope for the future. The guys were proactively chatting and laughing alongside the girls, displaying elegance and humor in an attempt to attract their attention. The girls shyly blushed, resembling vermilion clouds dyed red by the morning sun. The corners of their lips displayed hints of laughter, as beautiful as blossoming flowers. The sweet taste of the grass straw diffused throughout AI Hui's mouth. He felt distracted, yet a little envious at the same time. A yearning look flashed across his eyes, then disappeared. His face returned to normal, indifferent and calm. When he thought about the owner of the swordsman school, the 3 years he spent in the wilderness, and the laborers that had been reduced to nothing but a pile of bleached white skeletons, he felt that he was very fortunate. Being alive was far more important than anything else. Being alive was the greatest fortune. At this moment, Fatty's non-stop gibberish became much more pleasing to his ears. The towering gate began to open slowly. Ai Hui stood up and brushed off the dirt on his body, his face steeled with determination. He knew that what lay beyond the door was a brand new path, a path that he could not have imagined. He did not know where it would lead to. Just as he entered the wilderness 3 years ago, he took a step forward, speaking to Fatty without turning his head. Let's go. Chapter 3. Anger. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Translator. TYZ Editor. Lise, my name is Ai Hui, and I'm 16 years old. I'm pleased to be with all of you in the same class. Please take good care of me. Ai Hui tried his best to keep his tone gentle and composed as he stood on the podium. He had to keep reminding himself that this was not the wilderness. His vantage point allowed him a panoramic view of his surroundings, and he found no hidden dangers. After introducing himself, Ai Hui descended the podium steps in an uncultured fashion. Some of the students were surprised at Ai Hui's age and broke out into lively discussions. He's old, and he's still able to enter the induction ground. He's even got such a weird name. He's probably from the old territory. BVEC. Seeing the commotion, Teacher Su, who was standing off to one side, gave a gentle cough and said, "For those students coming up next, try not to give a brief description of yourself and talk more about your backgrounds. This way, your classmates will have a better understanding of you." Upon returning to his seat, Ai Hui heaved a sigh of relief. Compared to being in a battle, the current situation left him far more bewildered. Aware of his disordered breathing, he inhaled, and then exhaled deeply. Gradually, the nervousness disappeared, and his body was restored to its peak form once again. To the others, Ai Hui appeared oddly quiet. No one realized that the peaceful and withdrawn guy that sat in the corner of the classroom was actually a dormant beast that could erupt at any time with terrifying strength. The 3 years he spent in the wilderness had left him with too many scars. For example, his choice in seating. He specifically chose a spot that was beside the window. From there, he'd be able to see outside, making it easier for him to defend against any incoming attacks. Or if the attacks came from within the school compound, he could immediately escape by jumping out the window. It dictated how he observed his surroundings. At any moment in time, he was secretly monitoring the area around him, the teacher on the podium, the students around him, the structure of the school compound, and the placement of tables and chairs. Too often, these minor details were the key factors in deciding one's fate, to live or to die. One could never complain about an overabundance of information. He didn't consciously make these decisions. Everything came naturally to him. He had around 200 classmates, and most of them were quite young. This was evident from the naive and tender looks on their faces. There were a few fellows that dressed elegantly and appeared haughty, clearly coming from influential families. Ai Hui recognized one of them as the same noble who came flying in on the high-quality fiery floating cloud. His name was apparently Xuanhuan, somewhat prideful and rather strong. Ai Hui took mental note of him. This guy had been appointed as the class monitor. What is a class monitor, he wondered. A team leader. It was never a good idea to let an arrogant guy be the team leader. The experienced Ai Hui made silent observations from the side. However, this had nothing to do with him. It was only a pity that he and Fatty weren't assigned to the same class. At this thought, he felt some regret. But in the next moment, Teacher Su said something that crushed this feeling and replaced it with overflowing fury and endless killing intent. Next, I will announce the fees that are charged by the induction ground and the school. Everyone can feel that the concentration of elemental energy in the city is much stronger, right? Training in such an environment will save effort and ensure better results. The standard rent for a single room is 50,000 yuan per year. As another option, we also provide a more luxurious dormitory that has an elemental energy concentration 9 times higher than the outside world's. This upgraded room costs 70,000 yuan per year, and the students who can afford it are free to apply. Now, let's talk about the food. The food sold within the grounds are rather cheap. Daily meals cost 200 yuan per day, and this includes the breakfast. AI Huey's cheeks twitched indiscernibly. He didn't want to listen to any more. He tried his best to control his facial expression, but the rage within him was practically consuming him. Under the table, his clenched fists were riddled with pulsing veins. The induction ground provided room and board. Haha. Why didn't he kill that wretched fatty at registration? The teacher continued to talk non-stop on the podium. His saliva flew across the air and landed on the blackboard, seemingly forming a glittering word, money. Even after half an hour, this fellow was still talking about the fees. AI Hui had the sudden urge to charge forward and kill Master Su, who now seemed like an aggressive, life-threatening beast. No, Master Su was also a beast that had a deep blood feud with him. AI Hui squinted as the look in his eyes turned ice-cold. Haha, he had killed so many beasts like the one in front of him right now. An hour passed. By now, AI Huey's anger had completely disappeared, his ice-cold gaze replaced by a lifeless one. He was resigned to his fate, and it would be a bitter death. He was even tempted to escape back to the wilderness. The dangerous beasts with their blood-stained ivory fangs in the somber wilderness now appeared gentle and cute. Instead, shouldn't that be the true appearance of the induction ground? This place was actually 100 times more dangerous than the wilderness. When Teacher Su was perfectly satisfied, he finally stopped. Those students that came from the old territory should have received a sum of money after passing the aptitude test, correct? This is to be used for your daily allowance and study purposes. He did not pass the aptitude test. AI Hui looked insipidly at the teacher. Of course, that money is only enough for your basic necessities. If you wish to obtain more resources and opportunities, you'll have to work harder. There are a total of 70.6 cities in the induction ground that provide plenty of job opportunities and daily missions for you to earn reasonable remuneration. I have to remind everyone, however, that your main objective in coming to the induction ground was to learn and train, not make money. Don't waste too much time on earning money and delay your training, the gains will not make up for your losses. AI Hui heaved a sigh of relief. Luckily, there was a way out of this predicament. Like a deer that had barely escaped from the tiger's claws, the joy from his new lease on life formed a sheen of cold sweat across his forehead. AI Hui dabbed at his forehead and revised the risk level of the induction ground in his mind. Teacher Su began to distribute thick stacks containing detailed information. A timetable, a map of the local area, a job list, a mission list, locations of all available lodgings and restaurants, and routes to various cities. Everyone has 3 days to settle their room and board. After that, we will begin lessons. Note that Introduction to Elemental Energy is not within our syllabus. For those who have never attended this course before, you can self-study at the library or attend Teacher Dong's introductory class. Class dismissed. AI Hui searched for Teacher Dong's introductory class on the timetable and circled it. This was a class he definitely needed to attend. However, the most crucial problem that he had to settle right now was the issue of money. He was penniless and didn't even have money for lunch. He sat perfectly upright and used his sharp vision to quickly scan through the hefty information in his hands. The first thing he looked for was the phrase, "all meals provided." AI Hui heaved a sigh of relief when he saw that many places had it. Then, he began to use his fingertip to follow the listings one by one until suddenly, his fair and slender finger stopped in its tracks. The sharpness and intensity of his gaze disappeared, becoming reserved and puzzled as he became somewhat lost in his own thoughts. Chewing a grass straw in his mouth, Ai Hui carried his shabby backpack in one hand and a map in the other and walked out of the school compound. Unfamiliar streets and shops passed before his eyes. Various objects he had never seen before whizzed past his body and over his head, and the people around him discussed topics that he knew nothing about. Ai Hui realized that he'd been calmly observing the unfamiliar environment around him. After spending 3 years in the wilderness, his strength still couldn't be considered powerful, but his mental strength had grown much stronger. Though it wouldn't be easy, he had the courage to live alone and take on the uncertainties of this world, and this was probably what growing up was all about, and to mature faster than others was not necessarily bad. He laughed to himself. It seemed that after leaving the wilderness, his temperament had become more unpredictable. Slinging the shabby backpack over his shoulder with the grass straw still dangling from his lips, he looked at the map and walked alongside his shadow under the sun towards his destination. Luckily, the place wasn't hard to find since the commission center building was eye-catching and located at the center of the city. "Are you seriously going to accept this commission?" The old man in charge of allocating commissions warned Ai Hui, "The area is quite big, and the daily cleaning workload is rather tough. Honestly speaking, I hadn't expected anyone to take on this commission. The owner of this training hall hasn't returned for the past 20 years. Before he left, he deposited a sum of money into our account, and since it hasn't run out, we've been releasing the same commission every year. However, you must know that the remuneration for this commission follows the standard from 20 years ago. People stopped taking this commission for 10 years now. I have to remind you that the pay will be very small, barely paying for your meals. Are you sure you still want to accept this commission?" Ai Hui answered with a question of his own, "Can I have a partial advance payment?" The old man realized Ai Hui's financial problem and nodded. "You can. And remember, once you take up this commission, you can't quit before you leave the induction ground. Do you want to reconsider your decision?" Ai Hui bluntly replied, "I accept it." "Very well." The old man quickly handled the formalities for him. "That place is very spacious. You can stay there and save your lodging fees. The advance payment has been sent to your card. Here's the key, and the address is on it. Finally, welcome to the induction ground." "Thank you." Ai Hui thanked the old man from his heart and gave a sincere bow. "Such a polite kid." The old man revealed a smile. "Continue to work hard. Strength is everything." Ai Hui did not know how to react to the old man's kind gesture, but he tried his best to return the smile. "I will." As the saying went, the heart would never panic with money in hand. Ai Hui's mood had lifted, and the world seemed more beautiful to him now. He was amused by the various, bizarre scenes on the street. Ai Hui felt like a tourist, taking an interest in everything around him. An enormous 3-leaves bamboo cart flew over his head, making him stop in his tracks to look up. A spacious bamboo cage was suspended under the hovering 3-leaves bamboo cart. Inside it were a few rows of bamboo chairs filled with passengers. At the head of the bamboo cart, there was a rainbow-colored cage. The vines atop the cage emitted a multi-colored glow and formed the words, "Green Mountain City," making them clearly visible from afar. Ai Hui had seen a 3-leaves bamboo cart in the wilderness before, but that model had been much uglier compared to this one. The bamboo cage on it had overgrown, colorful poison spikes, resembling a monster. Although its main purpose was to transport goods, the amount that it could carry was not a lot. With the wandering ferocious beasts and their terrifying offensive power, operating the cart was a dangerous job in the wilderness. Wood elementalists had little passion for combat, preferring to stay behind the front lines. However, when Ai Hui saw the 3-leaves bamboo carts everywhere, he could feel the flourishing prosperity of the induction ground. Even the elementalists he held in high regard could be found all over. As the 3-leaves bamboo cart flew towards the horizon, he withdrew his gaze and continued walking forward. Within a short time, he finally found the alley where the training hall was located at. According to the map, it was closer to the end. The deeper he walked in, the more he felt as though he had entered into an entirely different world. The desolate, ancient air suddenly engulfed him as he observed the surrounding old-fashioned houses that had clearly been there for many years. Abruptly, Ai Hui stopped in his tracks. Chapter 4. Sand Puppet Lulan. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Translator. TYZ Editor. Least. Not far from him, in the middle of the alleyway, a figure struggled in what seemed to be a pool of yellow quicksand. Ai Hui increased his vigilance. The first thought that came to his mind was Earth Elementalists. They had many unique killing moves that were difficult to guard against. When there didn't seem to be any changes to the situation, Ai Hui took a closer look and discovered something strange about the figure. Only the top half of its body was visible. Its skin was slightly yellowish with a coarse, gritty texture, and on its face, it wore a black mask that seemed to be made of some kind of dense rock. Ai Hui opened his mouth and blurted out, "Sand Puppet." The figure stopped struggling and cast a glance at Ai Hui before replying, "Yes, you can call me Lulan." It was a male voice, deep and hoarse. Sand puppets were a favorite of Earth Elementalists. They were easy to make and repair, would undertake any tasks without complaints, and were very suitable for manual labor. This one happened to be made of the high-quality heavy sand produced by the yellow sand manufacturer in the Avalon of 5 Elements. It was easy to recognize the sand puppet based on its composition, but also, he had seen plenty of them in the wilderness. "It appears that you've encountered some troubles." Ai Hui walked to the front of Lulan and squatted. "Is it your sand core?" If a sand puppet malfunctioned, it was most likely because of the sand core. It was the most important component of their bodies, crafted by Earth Elementalists using heavy sand. Each core was unique, however, since Earth Elementalists each had their own crafting methods. The sand core was pivotal in the formation of its body since they were entirely made of individual particles. Hence, if the core broke down, the sand puppet would be reduced to a pool of yellow sand. "Yes, it's a chronic problem." Lulan sounded somewhat helpless. "Can you help me?" "My master is Master Xiao. He lives in the second building from the end of the alleyway. Could you deliver a message to him?" "The second building from the end of the alleyway?" Ai Hui raised his eyebrows. "Seems like we're going to be neighbors for some time." Seeing Lulan's rather high intelligence, Ai Hui assumed that a powerful Earth Elementalist lived next to him. Just as Ai Hui put his hand into the pool of yellow sand, he immediately felt the tug of strong Earth Elemental energy crushing him like a grinding millstone. His entire face shuddered as he covered his palm with metal elemental energy, making it into a razor-sharp dagger. "Try to bear with it." Just as Ai Hui finished his sentence, the metal elemental energy gathered in his hands suddenly exploded outward. Bang! A low, muffled explosion could be heard from within the pool of yellow sand as invisible shockwaves diffused across the area. Lulan's upper body froze in the pile of trembling sand. 2 seconds later, his eyes brightened. The dispersed yellow sand rapidly gathered around his body like a pile of metal dust attracted to a magnet. In the blink of an eye, not a speck of sand could be seen on the floor. With a recovered body, Lulan started to move his body around. Amazed, he asked, "Such a magical method, how did you do it?" "It's a simple method," Ai Hui corrected him. He picked up his shabby backpack and slung it over his shoulder. "It's only for emergencies though. You still have to go back and examine your sand core again." But he wasn't lying, it really wasn't some ingenious method. Ai Hui had seen Earth Elementalists in the wilderness use this method to treat problematic sand puppets every once in a while. It didn't work every time, but it did at least 8 times out of 10. Admittedly, however, this was Ai Hui's first time trying it himself. No sane earth elementalist would let a laborer repair his or her sand puppet. Lu Lan naturally didn't know this. Instead, he felt that Ai Hui possessed the demeanor of a very capable individual. Thank you very much. Lu Lan bowed and thanked him sincerely. Don't worry about it. My name's Ai Hui. Ai Hui waved his hand, signaling Lu Lan to not fret over it and continued walking towards the alley's end. Let's go, we're heading in the same direction. Lu Lan followed beside Ai Hui and asked, so where are you heading? The Vanguard Training Hall. Is it located here? Ai Hui asked casually. We are indeed neighbors. Lu Lan's deep voice contained a tinge of excitement. We're right next door. Is this your house? It seems no one's been here in a long time. Ai Hui's walking pace slowed down, but he acted natural as he replied, no, I've taken on a commission that requires me to clean up this place. Lu Lan oohed. So you're a new student. You got it. Ai Hui nodded. He could already sense that Lu Lan seldom left his house. A sand puppet's intelligence had the capacity to develop further. While Ai Hui was in the wilderness, he had seen combat sand puppets behave cunningly and callously, truly killing machines. There was a saying, one can easily tell the character of an earth elementalist by looking at their sand puppet. Judging by Lu Lan, he could tell that the Master Shao, was an unworldly earth elementalist that focused on trainings. We've arrived. This is the Vanguard Training Hall. Lu Lan pointed at an old-fashioned house at the end of the alleyway. To build a training hall in such a secluded area is really... Ai Hui shook his head. The 3 years he had spent in the swordsman school made him sensitive towards issues regarding training halls. He came roughly knowing that it would be out of the way. However, now that he saw this place with his own eyes, he realized that he had underestimated just how remote it would be. Was the landlord a depressed individual like the owner of the swordsman school? Possible. Didn't the old man say that the landlord hadn't contacted them for 20 years? Perhaps he'd been hinting at the landlord's unknown fate. Whatever. Ai Hui didn't care too much. After all, he was doing this for the money. The training hall and the fate of the landlord had nothing to do with him. Clusters of spiderwebs covered the door, and the signboard over the door was stacked with layers of filth, rendering the inscribed words illegible. If he didn't know this place was called the Vanguard Training Hall, he wouldn't have been able to recognize it. He took out the key, easily unlocking the door. It seemed he had found the right place. As he pushed open the door, heavy stacks of dust fell down like snow. Ai Hui stood at the entrance and waited for the dust to settle before he stepped in. The courtyard was dilapidated while the weeds had grown taller than an actual person. Most of the overgrown vegetation were sword reeds, appearing like a sea of blades pointed at the sky. Ai Hui's eyes twitched at the scene. The landlord must have had a weird taste to grow sword reeds in his own home. The plants were generally used to make grass swords, which was exactly what Ai Hui used as a weapon. However, when Ai Hui saw the overgrown courtyard, he began to feel the beginnings of a huge headache. Sword reeds were difficult to cut due to their extreme durability that far exceeded even steel's. That wasn't even the worst part. Sword reeds grew in thickets, so if someone accidentally fell into it, their body would be covered in cuts and bruises. Ai Hui shook his head and laughed bitterly. Another upsetting matter was that these sword reeds were too thick and old. If they were at most 5 years old, he could use them to make grass swords, but these were useless to him. I can help you, Lu Lan offered. Ai Hui shook his head. I can do it on my own. You should go back and check on your sand core. What I did just now was a stopgap measure. It won't solve the root of the problem. Okay then. Lu Lan tilted his head. You can wait for me to return tomorrow. I can do it on my own. Since I've taken the money, I should work on it myself, Ai Hui replied as he opened up his shabby backpack. He did not have the habit of throwing his own tasks at other people to do. Okay, I'll go back first then. Without another word, Lu Lan's body dissolved into a pool of sand that disappeared into the ground. Although sword reeds were considered by many as a troublesome plant, Ai Hui knew that wasn't the case. After 3 years in the wilderness, Ai Hui considered himself a fledgling botanologist. It was only a pity that he wasn't a wood elemental, otherwise, he felt he'd have much better future prospects than with his current affinity for the metal element. His backpack was filled with an assortment of objects. Animal bones, pelts, seeds, and colorful stones. These were the spoils of war and savings he'd obtained during his 3 years in the wilderness. Most of these he had collected himself, while some had been given to him by other elementalists as rewards or as handouts because they were considered useless by their previous owners. Ai Hui guarded them closely. No matter what, he never allowed himself to lose his backpack. From his satchel, he took out a small, red bottle containing a kind of fire poison called flaming timber that he had personally concocted. Its toxicity was not strong enough to be used in combat, but it was an essential item that everyone carried in the wilderness. There, the overgrown vegetation could blot out the sun, making many places difficult to access. To set up camp as well, the area had to be cleared away. Unfortunately, there were countless plant types in the wilderness that were exceptionally resilient, even more so than sword reeds. Manpower alone could not get rid of them, and they were resistant to ordinary fire. Only a fire poison like flaming timber could dispose of them. As Ai Hui unstoppered the bottle, a sulfuric smell immediately diffused through the air. He then poured the lava like flaming timber onto the sword reeds. As soon as it touched the leaves, the lush green became an ash-gray color that rapidly spread throughout the entire thicket with a visible speed. Gradually, the sulfuric smell in the air dissipated, and after approximately 5 minutes, the sea of sword reeds had turned completely gray. PFFF. The sword reeds collapsed like an avalanche, leaving the entire area littered with plant ashes. Ai Hui skillfully buried the plant ashes into the ground. By doing so, he could effectively suppress any future weed growth since they avoided the smell of flaming timber. Fast with his movements, in the blink of an eye, he had cleared the entire courtyard. Using a broom, he swept away the spiderwebs in the room corners, then drew water from the well to wipe the floors clean. With several years' worth of dust built up, he had to do 5 to 6 runs to clean it all. In the corners of the house, there were stone grooves with old calabash gourds. After clearing away the dead leaves that had accumulated in the gourds, Ai Hui wrapped vines around the pillars and eaves before hanging the calabashes on them. The windows were open to ventilate the house. He hung the weather-beaten wooden signboard in the main hall, washed the bronze incense burner and stuck in them 3 joss sticks that he had found in a cupboard. After working hard for the entire day, the training hall became as clean as new. Nightfall arrived, and the calabashes that hung under the eaves emitted a gentle glow, giving the training hall an ambient lighting. The bluestone benches were clean and neat. A simple and rustic wooden house. Neatly placed equipment. Spiraling incense that contained traces of sweetness. Like a dream hidden within the depths of his mind, the tranquil scene before him seemed to appear without any warning. He was caught off guard and somewhat startled by the captivating scene, unable to resist its charm. He was slightly startled. Chapter 5. Blind Battle. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Translator. TYZ Editor. Least it was surely true that the mind could not win over an empty stomach. When Ai Hui returned to his senses and realized that he had not eaten anything the entire day, an overwhelming rush of hunger engulfed him. Limbs weakened, he supported himself by holding on to the wall. An empty sack could not stand upright. This idiom made so much sense now. As he staggered out of the alleyway, he caught sight of a noodle house and almost crawled his way over. Boss, 1 bowl of noodles. Okay. After eating, Ai Hui regained his strength, but when he went to pay his bill, his eyes almost popped out of their sockets. How? How much? 150 yuan, thank you for patronizing my store, the boss replied. 150 yuan. Ai Hui asked incredulously. He stared at the boss with a darkening expression and a murderous aura. Since childhood, he'd never been one to be pushed around. New student. The boss furrowed his eyebrows. This was not the first time such an incident had happened here. He pointed helplessly at the wooden signboard in his shop. The prices are listed here. Ai Hui's eyes followed the boss's hand to the signboard, an unpleasant feeling rising like bile in his stomach. The boss was speaking the truth. Ai Hui reeled out of the noodle house with an ashen face. He finally knew why no one was willing to take up the commission on the training hall. The monthly salary was only 4,500 yuan. Barely enough to pay for his meals. Who taught mathematics to the old man at the commission center? Reveal yourself now. 30 bowls of noodles. A bowl of noodles each day. When Ai Hui touched his stomach, which did not seem full even though he had just eaten, and thought about his future, his face turned pale. He stepped into the induction ground with lofty aspirations, thinking he could become a powerful elementalist and take control of his life. However, he did not expect himself to be defeated by a bowl of noodles sold in the induction ground. If he couldn't even fill his stomach, why bother talking about training? The night breeze sent a bone-piercing chill down his spine, causing him to tremble non-stop. No, he had to think of a way to earn money. After 5 seconds of self-pitying, Ai Hui pulled himself together. Money was important not only to ensure a full stomach but also to benefit an elementalist's training. While he was in the wilderness, he had followed elementalists around just to hunt dire beasts. A dire beast's skin, flesh, tendons, and bones were considered treasures. The bones and tendons could be made into weapons and the skins into armor. As for the dire beast's blood, they were usually used to concoct elixirs, and the flesh was mainly used to make elemental food. The so-called elemental food was rich in elemental energy, which was highly beneficial to one's training. The current elemental energy system had been inherited from the extensively detailed cultivation system. It was impacted so deeply that it still retained certain cultivation aspects that could still be seen today. Ai Hui was no longer an ignorant teenager who thought that diligent training was all that was needed to become more powerful. The streetlights lit up, brilliantly illuminating the nighttime central Pine City. New students wandered in groups, and the streets bustled with life. As newly admitted students, they did not have any worries yet. The excitement from entering the induction ground continued to burn within them, making them brim with hope for the future. Perhaps the laughter and joy surrounding him alleviated Ai Hui's worries. He wandered around with both hands plunged deeply into his pockets, leisurely walking alone through the myriad of beautiful lights. He somewhat enjoyed this moment filled with the bustling crowd, the churning mist under the light, and the wafting aroma of food. This was a special moment for him. Even though he was always unknowingly on high alert, his cautious mind had relaxed a bit at the sight of the lively atmosphere and the innocence of the ordinary people. He roamed aimlessly around the streets when suddenly, a signboard caught his eyes. The signboard wrote, "Blind Battle. If you can last for 5 minutes, you can take away 50,000 yuan. 50,000 yuan. Ai Hui's eyes promptly lit up, resembling a hungry wolf that had identified its prey. His hands that were previously in his pockets were now touching his stomach, subconsciously rubbing it. Not really full yet. How many bowls of noodles could 50,000 yuan buy? It didn't seem worth it, but how come he felt hungry again? Without completing his thought process, he lost control of his legs that had already walked through the entrance. The body was always honest with its needs. Shi Clan Training Hall. The door to the resting lounge opened, revealing a tall, elegant, and frosty lady brimming with confidence. She wore a black windbreaker and a hat that covered almost her entire face. The young lady pulled off her overcoat and passed it to a middle-aged man behind her asking, "Blind battle. This concept is rather interesting. I like it. I'm glad that young mistress is pleased." The middle-aged man quickly bent his body and took the jacket from her. "We've received word from the clan to inform young mistress of the situation. There aren't many experts in Central Pine City. Most of them are new students. Therefore, we came up with a new concept like this, but we're not certain whether it will work or not. You didn't announce my name, right?" The young lady sat down and crossed her gorgeous, slender legs. She took the glass of fruit juice in front of her and sipped leisurely. Her long hair draped over her shoulders, flawlessly framing an exquisite oval face and eyes that shone brightly like stars. Her facial expression exuded extreme confidence that was tinged with pride. Her features made her breathtakingly beautiful but also gave her an imposing aura. Even when calmly sitting on the sofa, she emitted a powerfully oppressive air. "No." The middle-aged man quickly denied. "If we announced Miss Xuanhuan's name, who would dare to come? Your reputation is truly intimidating. We planned the blind battle and prepared a mask without eyes holes to prevent anyone from recognizing you. It appears that all of you have put in a lot of effort. Thanks for the trouble." Xuanhuan smiled with satisfaction. "Tell everyone that they'll be rewarded with a 3-month bonus. As a beauty who received both attention and recognition in the induction ground, she would be watched wherever she went. However, she was a smart individual who knew when to stay low. Key. Power was the absolute truth. This was what she had been taught from a young age. "Thank you very much, young mistress," the middle-aged man hurriedly said with an uncontrollable burst of happiness showing in his eyes. A 3-month bonus was a huge sum of money to them, and more importantly, they earned praise from young mistress. Getting in her good books would definitely be exceptionally beneficial to their futures. Xuanhuan continued her line of questioning. "How many people have signed up?" "As of this moment, 20.3 people." Just as the middle-aged man finished his sentence, he tilted his head and continued, 20.4 people. Someone has just signed up. We hope to attract more people by not setting an entrance fee, but it's just that we had no time to advertise this event with the time we were given. It's enough. It seems I can have a good workout tonight. Xuanhuan lightly stroked her eyebrows as she gave a thin smile. Suddenly, she withdrew her smile and asked, "How long before it starts?" "It begins at 8:30. There's still 15 minutes left," the middle-aged man replied. He could not help but remind, "Young mistress, you will have to hold back a bit. I believe many new students will show up. If you injure them, I'm afraid it might bring about some troubles." "Don't worry." Xuanhuan slowly nodded her head. "I put on the suppression bracelet." The middle-aged man heaved a sigh of relief. He was most worried about little mistress injuring the new students. If she hurt the senior students, the induction ground would be lenient, but the induction ground paid more attention to the new students. With the suppression bracelet that limited the powers of an elementalist, he felt now that he must have overthought the matter. Given young mistress's genius and her harsh self-expectations, how was it possible for her to come all the way here to bully a new student? "You can leave now. I need to prepare," Xuanhuan said plainly. "Yes." The middle-aged man bowed and left the resting lounge. Xuanhuan withdrew her smile, donning a more serious expression. She came to Central Pine City only to accompany her grandfather in visiting a friend, but she did not have any thoughts of slacking off. Before she left, she had already notified her family's training hall branch in Central Pine City that she planned on training there. She just did not expect them to put in so much effort in setting up a blind battle. This was her first time fighting in one. By wearing the suppression bracelet, her strength didn't differ much from the new students, testing her techniques even more. She was unsure how much of her actual capabilities would be exhibited in this battle. However, she never shied away from unknown challenges. Instead, the uncertainty aroused her fighting spirit and even made her eager for it to come. It had been a while since she had felt such excitement. She began to adjust her combat attire, tying up her long, draping hair with a red ribbon, revealing her beautiful, snow-white neck. Her unhurried movements and solemn expression gave the impression of vigilance. Upon wearing the mask, the world before her was replaced with nothing but darkness. The unfamiliar blackout sent a quiver through her heart. Closing her eyes, she slowly adjusted her breathing, feeling around her meticulously. The world before her blinded eyes became hushed, allowing her to hear sounds that she usually overlooked. Instead, they now resounded through her ears like fish silently emerging from the depths of the sea. Her heightened tactile sensitivity extended throughout her body, the subtle streams of air that blew by her skin enough to make her tremble involuntarily. This was a brand new world, a world she had never experienced before. It gave her extreme excitement. Her instincts told her that if she could master this unfamiliar world, she would definitely make a breakthrough in her level. Time passed silently, allowing her to clearly feel out this quiet and alien world. The blind battle is about to start. You have 3 minutes to prepare. The blind battle is a 5-minute endurance match. The last one standing on the arena after 5 minutes will win the prize money of 50,000 yuan. To make it more realistic, the arena has been fully covered with the non-toxic and odorless ink night fumes. It will only affect your vision, perfectly simulating the night scene. To prevent unnecessary injuries, this endurance match will be fought using bare hands. Everyone, please wear your defensive gears and mask. The match will begin in 1 minute's time. Xuanhuan stood and headed towards the door that connected the resting lounge to the arena. It was as if she had used a ruler to measure her pace, stopping right where her mask touched the door. She waited silently, resembling an artist's most perfect sculpture. The blind battle is about to begin. Counting down now, 10, 9, 8. Xuanhuan remained motionless. 3, 2, 1. Battle begins. The door hinges slid open. Without any hesitation, Xuanhuan entered the arena. At that moment, she lost the faint light that had previously shone through her mask. She was now truly in a world of pure darkness. The ink night fumes was worthy of its name. Xuanhuan secretly praised it in her mind. The ink night fumes was a kind of smokescreen that was seldom used by people because there were only a small number of wood elementalists who knew how to concoct it, and it also had an extremely expensive price tag. Its effect, however, was rather remarkable. Xuanhuan's recent acclimatization had been shattered immediately. Suddenly, an ominous feeling rose in her heart. Chapter 6. Success. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Translator. Irene. Editor. Lise. Unlike the others who felt as though they were bound hand and foot, Ai Hui was like a fish in water, glad to be back in a familiar environment. In the wilderness, darkness ruled. Numerous massacres and sneak attacks occurred quietly in that very darkness, seizing lives and warmth. Strength didn't matter, the elementalists who were unable to adapt to the dark would not survive. Ai Hui soon sensed a presence nearby, so close that he anticipated they would pass each other. Initially, he had no intention of attacking. As long as he managed to hide and keep silent in a corner for 5 minutes, he could collect the prize money and leave because the rules stated that he would win as long as he persevered for 5 minutes without being defeated. It was, however, a matter of life and death in the wilderness. No rules applied. When Ai Hui realized that the situation was not as he had expected, he responded instinctively. The opponent was dangerously close to him. If the opponent attacked, he wouldn't be able to launch a counterattack. Ai Hui entered a flowing state and gauged the danger level using the terrifying dire beasts that lived in the wilderness as a benchmark. He would never foolishly assume that the people around him would be unable to adapt to the darkness. Countless life or death experiences had taught his body that when such situations arose, initiating an attack would give him a greater advantage. His footsteps were light and graceful. Like a cat in the night, each step he took was absolutely noiseless. His movements were very slow, to the point that not even the sound of wind could be heard. This was where AI Huey's rich experience came into play. Within the dark environment, each breath or sound was as piercing as a dazzling ray of light. Silence was darkness's best companion. AI Hui vaguely sensed his opponent's position and gently advanced towards it. He was in a highly anticipatory state. The flesh and muscles throughout his entire body were in a critical state, like a volcano on the verge of eruption. Nobody would have been able to discern this, however, from his external appearance. Suddenly, he stopped and held his breath. He was a seasoned hunter, he sensed that his prey had detected his presence. He did not know how to describe this sense of awareness or where this intuition was based. There was no need for substantiation in the wilderness. There was only victory or failure, life or death. He stood in place like a statue, without a single movement. On the other side, Xuanhuan smelled the faint trace of a dangerous odor. Although she wasn't certain, it was enough to put her on guard. She focused all her attention on the surroundings, vigilantly using her ears to capture any sounds. The surroundings were very quiet, as if there was only emptiness. But somewhere a little further away, she could hear the breaths of a few people. Although they were suppressed, she managed to capture the noises. In fact, she heard someone tiptoeing quietly around her left side. Inwardly she shook her head. At this point, any movement would lead to an attack. Right then, about 10 meters away, a cry of surprise and a stifled groan could be heard, followed by the collisions of intense punching and kicking. Soon, chaos took over that area. Xuanhuan mentally heaved a sigh of relief. It seemed it was an illusion. There was no one within a 3-meter radius from where she stood. Fighting in the dark was indeed very different. Xuanhuan felt stimulated by such an unfamiliar battle. Her nerves tensed up like never before. Her perception of the surroundings was also unprecedentedly acute. If she could keep this up, her fighting abilities would take a qualitative leap. Before her eyes unfolded a path she had never seen before. She felt like a hunter hidden within the shadows, waiting for the best opportunity to strike. Confidence bubbled up within her. Under such a high level of alertness, even the slightest change in her surroundings could not escape her. While she was preoccupied with this fresh experience, she suddenly felt something brush against her shoulder. It broke her reverie and made her hair stand on end. She had not moved, so why would she bump into anything? Someone was close by. She'd been unable to detect anything, a presence, a sound, even a change in airflow. A chill shot up her spine. Her reaction was too slow, however. Even as she finally realized the danger, it was already too late. When Xuanhuan had been lost in her thoughts earlier, the statue like AI Hui made his move. He moved excruciatingly slowly, even more so than a 90-year-old lady. He advanced with his 5 fingers carefully extended, grasping and exploring the area before him. His body leaned forward slightly, with the flesh and muscles in his body all ready to make a lunge. With AI Huey's high level of concentration, he blocked out the battle noises from close by and remained completely unaffected. All his attention was on his fingertips. He knew that if he came into contact with someone, the battle would be over in a blink of an eye. Victory or defeat, the result would be pronounced at this moment. The moment his fingers felt an obstruction, AI Hui launched an attack without hesitation. With knees slightly bent and tendons creating a burst of energy, his body sprang forward with lightning speed like a nimble and fierce cheetah. The sensation beneath his fingertips became more solid, his rich experience leading him to deduce that he had touched his opponent's shoulder. When Xuanhuan responded by violently lunging forward to push against his attack, she lost her balance on the spot, and her body tumbled towards the ground. Her left hand, which had been ready to counterattack, lost effectiveness as she instinctively reached out to regain balance. However, her arm became entangled with his, locked into a vicious attack that numbed her right arm. The attack that completely suppressed her did not stop there. Xuanhuan was greatly shocked as her opponent's body wrapped around hers like a snake. His body pressed up against her back tightly like an octopus. His legs were like thick and solid steel wires. They extended to her front and held onto her legs as his toes clasped onto her calves like a metal lock. Never in her life had Xuanhuan had such close contact with a man. However, at that point, there were no butterflies in her stomach. There was only fear. Deep fear. The tough body lock made her feel like a fish caught in a net, lacking the power to struggle. She wanted to remove the suppression bracelet, but her limbs were clamped tightly, unable to budge. She didn't hear him gasping for breath either, not even the rise and fall of his breaths. The ice-cold silence caused her great fear. She felt as if she was being attacked by a lifeless machine, and its steel cables had wrapped themselves around her. Her terror surged when she felt her opponent slowly tightening his grip. She smelled death. The intense fear and her strong will to live made her struggle with unprecedented strength. Hair continuously swept across her mask where beneath it, her eyes were shut, her face grim and unfeeling. It was normal. Even a beast would struggle its hardest before death, how much more so would a human? The fight wasn't over yet. It was now a battle of wisdom and tenacity. His grip on her slightly slipped. Upon realizing that her struggle was taking effect, Xuanhuan's body wriggled even more intensely. Hui was like a hard-hearted hunter, steadily pressing down onto the main joints of the prey's body, letting it struggle and waste its energy. When the prey eventually runs out of strength, it was time for it to die. Soon enough, Xuanhuan ran out of breath and sweat started pouring from her body. She could feel her strength rapidly reducing. As she grew more and more tired, her opponent's grip became tighter and tighter. At this moment, she awoke from her fear. She regained a small measure of composure. The results from years of tough trainings was immediately displayed. She'd been born into a large and honorable clan and experienced many things since childhood. Initially, she had lost control of her mind and body because of her momentary panic, but now that she had recovered from it, she hurriedly created a countermeasure. A bizarre ray of light flashed, the elemental energy within Xuanhuan beginning to operate. Her body that had been bound tightly suddenly trembled. This slight tremble was not as aggressive as the struggle she had put up earlier, but the energy it released was so great that it far exceeded previous attempts to break free. Hui only felt a shocking amount of force penetrating his body before his limbs became numb, causing him to nearly let go of her. Danger. His prey had skills beyond his expectations. As soon as his mind recognized the precarious situation, his body reacted accordingly. Without a moment of hesitation, his left forearm that had been holding onto his target rose up like a viper. With lightning speed, his fingers opened up and reached for his target's throat. Unlike the slow, silent hunting from earlier, this move made a sharp crack and was quick like lightning. Xuanhuan's heart trembled, and sweat started pouring from her body once again. She had no doubt this claw on her throat was going to leave 5 bruises. Luckily, when her opponent let go of her arm, she was given an opportunity to resist. Her delicate, snow-white arm swung out like a pendulum, blocking her throat without the least bit of delay. Boom! The force of impact brought acute pains to her wrists. She jolted backwards but could not dodge completely. Her throat tightened as black flashed across her eyes with impending unconsciousness. Yet, she knew that no matter how difficult it was, she had to resist. She was resolute in her fight. Ignoring the burning pain of her neck, she used the only mobile part of her body, her wrists, to block off her opponent's violent attacks. This defensive move was one she was most familiar with from practice. Although her opponent's attacks were sharp, she managed to block them nevertheless. Moreover, she quickly found a possible weakness, but she wasn't sure. Until now, he had not utilized the elemental energy within his body. Was he holding back, or was it too weak? She couldn't be sure. Xuanhuan's tenacity led Ai Hui to feel a stronger sense of emergency. Instinctively, he launched an even more intense and murderous attack. The heart. A blow to any enemy's heart would render them defenseless. But first, he needed to remove his opponent's armor. To him, that was not a major problem. He learned to unfasten armor and untie ropes in the wilderness. The barbarians wore rough and sturdy armor with ropes that often could not be damaged by even swords. Only a certain technique could undo the knots from a dead barbarian's body armor, which had been an important part of his job. With his right hand, he quickly and quietly loosened the ropes that held her armor together. If anyone had witnessed that scene, they would not have been able to detect any pauses in his finger movements at all. Like a slippery loach invading into her armor, his right hand felt another knot. He untied it without any further thought. Any protective layer was an obstruction for him. Upon touching his opponent's skin, a lethal glint appeared in his eyes as his murderous instinct kicked in and burned fiercely. His 5 fingers formed a claw and speedily pinned down against his opponent's chest where the heart was located. Yet at the last moment, he recalled that this was not the wilderness, he was fighting for the 50,000 yuan prize money. Instead, he decided to first suppress his opponent's vital points. If she continued to resist, she had better not blame him for being relentless, because then he would not hesitate to kill. Boom! Target hit. He could clearly feel the body in his arms, which had been resisting earlier, become rigid. In the dark, Ai Hui had a keener sense of touch. Suspicion arose. This does not feel quite right. Chapter 7. Resolution. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Translator. Irene. Editor. Lise. Ai Hui was unable to make sense of the matter. After some time, he suddenly understood what he was grabbing onto. Feeling a lump of burning charcoal in his hand, he didn't know whether to hold on or to let go. D****. Ai Hui couldn't help but curse inwardly. He had no idea whom he was cursing at either. The motionless body in his arms wasn't putting up any resistance at all. From a fighter's point of view, that was a good thing, but why was he feeling this unreasonable sense of guilt? Seconds felt like years as he became drenched in sweat. Clang, clang, clang. The gong sounded, signaling the end of the battle. Ai Hui quickly removed his hands from his opponent and even considerately fastened the knots of her armor. He quietly got off her back and tiptoed into the smog. He was feeling guilty. It was better to stay far away from the target. Re-entering the crowd, Ai Hui let out a sigh of relief. This unexpected mistake left him lost and helpless. Luckily he had a mask on and the night smog was dark and dense. He felt his face burning and felt the urge to turn around and leave. Luckily, his last trace of determination remained, the 50,000 yuan. Along with the scattering smog, Ai Hui's embarrassment slowly dissipated as well. It was only an accident. All kinds of accidents happened on the battlefield, or so Ai Hui told himself. He made so much sense, there was nothing to refute. After convincing himself, Ai Hui felt calmer. Soon the smog dispersed completely and the head of the training hall was shocked to see over 10 people remaining. He expected 2 or 3 to remain at best because he knew of his mistress's powerful fighting abilities. When it came to such realistic combat drills, she gave it her all, never going easy on her opponents. Why were there so many left? Could it be that mistress was unable to adapt to the unfamiliar blind battle mode? Seeing the training hall's lack of response, someone from the audience blurted out, "What about the money? Are you going to give it or not?" A few others chimed in immediately. "Exactly, you're not trying to renege, are you? Hurry up and hand out the money. We're busy." The middle-aged man glanced at his mistress, but she had no reaction whatsoever, as though she did not see his questioning gaze. He was the head authority after all and had the right to act according to the situation. Moreover, to the training hall, 50,000 yuan was nothing. Although he did not expect so many victors, even a few 100,000 yuan of prize money could still be taken out easily. Upon receiving the money, everyone immediately cheered. To students, the 50,000 yuan was not a small sum at all. Now they could bear to spend extravagantly on things they normally refrained from buying. The crowd started to disperse. Ai Hui blended well into the masses, no different from any one of them. 50,000. Money in hand, he had long forgotten the awkward incident from earlier. He was on cloud 9. With no time to waste and full of vigor, he rushed into the noodle shop like a gust of wind. He confidently extended and opened his palm, saying to the boss in the most domineering manner yet since morning, "Boss, give me 5 more bowls." Finally, he could eat all he wanted without holding back. Only. Ai Hui shifted his gaze to his open palm. The hand that had just snap. His fingers balled up into a tight fist. All kinds of accidents happened on the battlefield, Ai Hui told himself once again, before digging into his noodles with a clear conscience. The head saw his mistress standing alone at her original position, and he had a premonition. She had already been standing there, without any movement, for more than 10 minutes. "Miss." He could not help but call out. It was as if his mistress did not hear him at all. His sense of foreboding grew stronger. Had an accident occurred during training? He simply could not imagine his mistress getting hurt. What a joke that would be. The trainers in the induction ground able to potentially outlast his mistress could be counted with one finger. Although she suppressed her powers in an unfamiliar blind battle, he did not believe anyone here could have caused her trouble. Her biggest problem was her inexperience with blind battling. All of a sudden his eyes flashed. Could it be that Miss was going through a moment of enlightenment? Indeed, was this not the legendary moment of enlightenment? It must be. He became agitated since he was in charge of the training hall and the blind battle was his arrangement. He had provided his mistress the opportunity to experience a moment of enlightenment. It was surely a huge contribution. He fantasized about advancing his career and achieving great success, unable to suppress a silly grin. Meanwhile, Xuanhuan was at a loss. What happened a while ago was a big blow to her, leaving her completely stupefied. From the incident until now, her mind was completely blank. She did not hear the middle-aged man calling out for her and did not even realize the battle was over and that every contestant had already left. She slowly regained consciousness from the muddle-headed state she was in. Her whole body trembled but she tried to contain it. It was just an accident, she told herself, but to no avail as her shudders continued from head to toe. She tried her best not to cry, but the great humiliation she suffered caused her to shake uncontrollably. Even if it had been an accident, she absolutely would not let that damned fellow get away with it. She gnashed her teeth and promised this to herself, emphasizing every word. Immediately, her trembling stopped and she no longer felt the urge to cry. It was as if that sentence had strange, magical powers. That's right, she absolutely would not let that damned fellow off. She regained her confidence from before, revealing the return of the high and mighty goddess. She took off her mask, her eyes shining with radiance once again. The middle-aged man's expression rapidly changed when he fixed his gaze upon his mistress's white as snow neck, astonished to find 5 purplish finger marks. Oh God! He could not believe his own eyes and almost cried out in alarm. Luckily he managed to hold his tongue. Miss had been defeated. If this piece of news were to spread, it would cause a big commotion in the induction ground. Here, his mistress's skill level was one of the highest, ranking among the top 5. Who could possibly beat her? His first instinct was that someone in disguise must have pulled a prank. However, he rejected the idea soon enough. Mrs. Secret whereabouts were kept well hidden, and her trip to the hall was by chance. Judging by the marks on her neck, her opponent must have held back or else her neck would have been shattered by now. Now that he thought of how his mistress had gotten into an accident in an event he had organized, the middle-aged man's back was drenched in no time. The fortunate fact that she was safe and sound brought some life back into his body, but his legs still felt a little weak. The unmasked Xuanhuan looked the same as she always had as she said faintly, "Find out who the contestants are." "Every single one of them, as well as those lying on the ground." The middle-aged man dared not hesitate and immediately obeyed. "Yes." He could hear the frigid chill in her tone and knew that she was extremely angry. Since young, she had never suffered or been in such an unfavorable situation. Out of the corner of his eyes, he peeked at the finger marks on his mistress's neck and felt a wave of fear come over him. Perhaps if he knew what exactly happened at the end, he would have fainted by now. Although he was quick to obey, he was whining inside. He said humbly and carefully, "I have been negligent in keeping track of their information. Investigations must be done through other methods, so I may need assistance from the clan." He did not anticipate such a command. In his mind, the contestants were merely his mistress's sparring partners. What was the point of keeping track of their names and backgrounds when they were going to be defeated by her? "At all costs," Xuanhuan said coldly. "The clan will utilize all its power, so check it thoroughly for me." The middle-aged man's heart trembled. Yes. He felt his mistress's resolution. There was nothing strange about it. After unexpectedly meeting a threatening opponent, neither she nor the family clan could possibly sit by and idly watch. He had enough confidence that if the clan were to mobilize its full power, he would be able to identify that man no matter how well he hid. Xuanhuan walked towards the hall's main entrance, seemingly covered in frost. Once outside, she observed the people walking around on the streets before turning to look at the hall once more. She clenched her fists and walked away. When Hui held on to the wall for support as he walked out of the hall, and he held on to the wall for support as he walked into Vanguard Training Hall as well. The difference was that before, his limbs had been weak from hunger but now he was too full to walk. With much effort, he finally shambled his way from the alley to the hall's entrance, taking him a whole 10 minutes. On the stone steps before the training hall entrance sat Lu Lan looking quite bored. Hui felt it strange. A bored sand puppet. Such an image seemed unfitting. "I have been waiting for an hour." Lu Lan stood up and patted the dust off his body upon seeing Hui approach. Hui had never met such a smart sand puppet before. Patting dust off his body took it to a whole new level. You are a sand puppet, there will not be dust as long as you do not pat your body. Plus, I do not remember us being close friends, he thought. Opening the door, he asked, "What's the matter?" "Nothing." Lu Lan crooked his head and thought for a while, as if searching for the right words. "We are neighbors, and I am paying you a visit." The sky was dark, but Hui could clearly see the black mask on Lu Lan's face. Upon seeing it, he was reminded again of the incident from earlier. He got the sinking feeling that he was traumatized. He asked absent-mindedly, "Why are you wearing a mask?" Lu Lan replied, "Because I do not have a face." "No face?" Hui was slightly taken aback. "Then why not make one?" It was very easy for a sand puppet to mold a face. Some of them could even change their faces as they pleased. Lu Lan answered, "Master Xiao felt it was troublesome." Hui thought about his neighbor, the Earth Elementalist, who was shut off from the world. Indeed, it was like him to think that way. It was normal to have odd characters amongst the Earth Elementalists, and Hui had personally met even stranger and more dangerous ones. In comparison, while Master Xiao had a strange personality, he did not seem as menacing. "Actually, it is not a big deal," Hui said, but at the same time, he felt the futility of his words. He knew there was really no need to brood over the incident, although it did feel pretty good. There is no need, I am just a sand puppet. I do not need a face, Lu Lan explained seriously. Who would remember a sand puppet? Ai Hui, who had been opening the door, stopped midway. He felt like saying something, but as the words were about to come out, he became uncertain. Yeah. Ai Hui seemed to sigh. It seemed cruel, but he couldn't say something he didn't mean. In the wilderness, sand puppets were only second to the laborers, easily eliminated and destroyed. No one would remember a sand puppet. What chance did a laborer have? We are both desolate, but I have 50,000 yuan, he thought. With his spirits raised, Ai Hui proudly hoisted the door open. Welcome in. Chapter 8. The Sword Embryo. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Translator. Irene Editor. Lise Ai Hui lied on his bed adjacent to the wall with a sword nestled within his arms. Slowly, his pitch-black eyes opened to the darkness and a cold ray of light sharply flashed before he returned to his harmless appearance. He'd been away from the wilderness for a few days now, but he still wasn't used to sleeping on a proper bed. He checked the sword embryo within his body, which he had been growing for 3 years now, and found no abnormalities. He put down his grass sword, the sensation of the sword embryo within his body disappearing. In the past, he was overly dependent on the sword, always holding on to it and never letting go regardless of the situation. Later on, he realized that doing so caused his body to lose its vigilance, so unless he was in a battle or keeping watch at night, he forced himself not to touch it. To survive the wilderness, Ai Hui had to have something up his sleeves, and that something was the sword embryo. On his 3rd day in the wilderness, he almost lost his life. From that moment onwards, he started his obsessive search for greater strength, because only then could he survive that cold place. He had no one to go to for help, the elementalists never gave him face, and he was neither clever nor capable of bargaining for what he wanted. Wild beasts wielded extraordinary strength when forced to desperation. People would too, under similar circumstances. Like a drowning man, Ai Hui desperately latched onto any chance of hope he could find. For example, he filled his mind with knowledge from swordplay manuals. The disintegration of spiritual force sent the cultivation world tumbling down, ending the era of cultivators. However, the cultivation system was deep-seated, advancing so greatly in the hundreds of thousands of years of its existence that it far exceeded what people imagine today. BL.net body training, spell formation, weapon training, 5 elements, necromancy, and so on. There were all kinds of strange and abundant practices that utilized spiritual force. Coupled with humankind's rich imagination, the most resplendent and grandest cultivation system was brought into existence. Amongst the vast jumble of magnificent cultivation types, swordsmanship always held the greatest value. Within the cultivation world, regardless of generation, the strongest followed the path of swordsmanship. During that era, swordplay manuals of great origins were created, bringing about reigns of terror every now and then. Today, they were buried between piles of old books and other garbage, not worth a single yuan. Swordsmen made up the majority of the cultivation world. It was only natural then that all sorts of strange concepts were born from the community. Ai Hui first eliminated the sword manuals that required spiritual force. These types of manuals were frequently used by the big sects and schools to figure out how to utilize spiritual force more effectively back when it was still ample. The manuals that he eliminated next were those he could not understand. Books that were cryptic and abstruse were in excess, comparable to the amount of hair on a cow's body. He could be considered a semi-expert with his experience flipping through an astonishing number of sword manuals, but he still found many of them too profound, some were archaic while others were deliberately mystifying. After he filtered them out, there were some sword manuals left. In the cultivation era, none of these manuals would be considered orthodox, and an honest and learned man would even deem them as demonic. Despite seeing them before, Ai Hui was not completely free from fear. These sword manuals were strange and unpredictable, completely beyond the limits of a normal person's imagination. For example, one manual taught cultivators to cut all emotions and desires, lust included, in order to gain supreme mastery of the sword. Another, the Dream Demon Swordplay Manual, instructed them to lie inside of a giant coffin, induce a coma, and train within the Dream Demon himself. Upon mastery, the sword skills they accumulated would marvelously become applicable in reality. In the past he glanced through these manuals out of interest and nothing more. Now, the thought of training according to these books sent shivers all over his body. Ai Hui finally managed to find a book that seemed less eerie and strange. It had no name and was badly damaged, and the only words on the cover stated at the top, the method to plant the sword embryo. After a detailed examination, Ai Hui more or less understood the meaning of sword embryo, and it was actually quite simple. The human body could only grow so much, but there was no limitation to developing the three essential life-sustaining energies within, the essence, the breath, and the spirit. These energies, however, held no form, drifting harmlessly like mist. Therefore, the creator of this sword manual came up with an extremely interesting theory, that is, the human body was like a sword sheath and the three energies made up the real sword. How then, could the three incorporeal energies come together to form the sword? The manual proposed a unique solution. Since it was difficult to congeal the energies into one entity, they could be treated instead as soil to nurture the sword embryo from within. Compared to the other books, this sword manual was obviously one of the more sensible ones. So without hesitation, Ai Hui followed the instructions on the sword manual and surprisingly succeeded in planting the embryo. Back in the swordsman's school, he would never have taken the risk, but in the wilderness, what was there to worry about? People died every day, and he didn't know when it would be his turn. Risk meant nothing to him. Instead, he was more concerned about the effectiveness of the so-called sword embryo. Survival was his top priority. 3 years passed, and he entered the induction ground after surviving the wilderness, yet the sword embryo was still a seed with neither movement nor change. Ai Hui was rather unperturbed about this matter. It was enough for him to have stepped out of the wilderness alive. He didn't hold unrealistic expectations from it either, since the book was badly damaged with illegible instructions towards the end. The sword manuals from the era of cultivation believed that all routes eventually led to the same destination. No matter how odd or unorthodox the method, all of them ultimately went back to the words, spiritual force. From this, he gathered that future training would most likely be related to the spiritual force as well. Nevertheless, swordsmanship was outdated, and it was worthless to train according to these manuals. He was not like the boss of the swordsman school who obsessed over these manuals and falsely believed in sword mastery. He simply had no intention of growing the sword embryo any further. While the manual did mention that meditating while holding on to the sword would help nourish the embryo, Ai Hui did it to improve his alertness at night instead. There was something intriguing about the sword embryo. It came to life whenever he held on to his sword, and his sixth senses became sharper as well. He could detect any slight sounds or movements around him. Later on, many elementalists became aware of his keen vigilance, and soon the night watch became one of his main tasks. This allowed him to loot from the battlefields, albeit only the leftover bits and pieces. For 3 years, Ai Hui carried the sword and meditated without sleep, persevering for what seemed like a day. The Ai Hui of the past shivered in the cold mud, while the Ai Hui today had a warm and safe room of his own to sleep in until the morning light. He felt contented and blissful. Today was the first day of lessons, and he looked forward to it. He hadn't left the house ever since he claimed the 50,000 yuan prize. Outside, the sky was still dark with only a glimmer of light, still some time before sunrise. Ai Hui energetically jumped off his bed, landing soundlessly like an agile cat. The carpet under his feet was made from rough woven fibers that was somewhat prickly, but Ai Hui felt nothing. With the glimmer of light shining in from the horizon, the room was illuminated enough for him to not bother turning on the light as he washed himself in the dim room. His familiarity with darkness could be seen as a gift from the wilderness where danger lurked in every corner and any trace of light would draw them to him. He skillfully removed the trap he had set behind the door and pushed it open. A rush of fresh air entered his lungs, giving him a burst of energy. The slightly illuminated sky and the quiet training hall brought back memories of the swordsman's school. The familiar sensations washed over him, and even the cool air seemed to have become more fragrant. The sharp and stiff edges of his face softened, a warm smile tugging at his lips. He began to mop the floor with quick and light strokes. Soon, his body remembered the familiar movement and reflexes quickly took over. Even before the sun came up, Ai Hui was finished with his cleaning chores. Without bothering to wipe the sweat off his body, he looked around the well-polished hall feeling genuinely satisfied and happy. Gazing at the sparkling ground, however, he was reluctant to step on it. During his 3-year stay in the wilderness, he fought in the muddy swamps and amongst dried, decaying leaves. He became accustomed to coming across rotting monster corpses with his shirt stained with blood. Over time, the stains dried up and faded into the same brown patches until he could no longer tell his blood from the beast's. The soles of his feet came into contact with the clean wooden floor. A familiar feeling. This dirtless, quiet hall was like a dream from deep inside his heart. The past 2 days had been a time of adjustment, but gradually he was starting to enjoy this new lifestyle. He even had the thought that life would be pretty good if he could carry on living like this. Feeling childish, Ai Hui laughed before turning around to pack his things. He had a tight schedule after all. The sword embryo's ability to keep him alive was not worth mentioning. His mastery of elemental energy paled in comparison to most people, so he faced much greater pressure as well. The induction ground had strict rules. Failure to activate the natal residence within a year or inability to reach the initial completion level within 5 years would lead to an expulsion. For students who came from the Avalon of 5 Elements, their parents would be blamed for their shortcomings, whereas students from the old territory would lose their chance to qualify as a member of the Avalon of 5 Elements and be banished back to where they came from. Those who attained the initial completion would have to leave the induction ground as well, since it signified their right to qualify as a registered elementalist. 5 years was all the induction ground could give. In reality, Ai Hui had only 4 years because there was one more rule: students above the age of 20 had to leave the training grounds. He didn't have much time left. If he wanted to take charge of his own fate, he had to work harder. And if he felt inferior, then he had to snap out of it and work even harder. The sun rose from beyond the horizon and shone brightly in the cold, blue sky. After packing, he slung the old cloth bag over his shoulders and exited the hall with a blade of grass in his mouth and the sky behind him. The early morning streets were quiet and dark, still asleep. From beyond the mountains and rivers extended the first thread of light, entering homes and illuminating the streets. Ai Hui luxuriated in the sunlight. In the wilderness, the hours before dawn were the most dangerous. It was a time ripe with the danger of sneak attacks, when deaths and fresh blood were aplenty. But with the arrival of the sunlight shining on the grassfield dews came the massacre's reveal and the retreat of the dire beasts and barbarians like the tides, returning peace and tranquility to the wilderness. While the school building was not far from the training hall, it was not near either. The closer he got to the school, the more concentrated the student crowd became. The streets bustled with activities, and it was an unfamiliar sight for Ai Hui. Upon seeing the young faces full of vitality and eagerness, Ai Hui felt somewhat envious. Their faces showed no traces of blood-soaked battle injuries and lacked vigilance against the outside world, since they had never experienced a massacre. They were flawlessly pure and led happy lives. Ai Hui felt out of place. He bit down hard on the bit of grass, allowing the raw, grassy taste to spread within his mouth. To them, the induction ground was a school. To him, it was his new battleground. Rather than happiness, survival was of a greater importance. He took a step forward and entered the school building. Chapter 9. Introduction. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Translator. Irene. Editor. Lise Xuanhuan gazed at her body in the mirror. The fair, flawless body she had once been proud of now had 5 faint, yet eye-catching, finger marks above her left breast. A few days had passed but the bruises still hadn't disappeared, causing her to believe her opponent had used substantial force. A baleful look appeared in her eyes. She did not want to recall what happened that day, but every time she bathed she could see the finger marks on her body. It made it difficult to restrain the anger. Luckily the marks on her neck were gone, since school was reopening today. She dressed, the usual confidence returning to her face. In the dining hall outside, food had already been prepared. As she entered, her grandfather gazed at her with a gentle smile. "Come, have your breakfast." "Grandfather," she called out sweetly before sitting down beside him. With her mother's early passing and her father's busy work schedule, her grandfather had been the one to raise her. Therefore every morning, she accompanied him during breakfast. A servant delivered a bowl of hot soup to the table. She trained regularly and so all her meals were specially prepared to replenish her elemental energy and nourish her body. Sip by sip, she drank her soup that had been brewed meticulously with expensive ingredients. Not only did it benefit her training but it also tasted fresh and delicious. Today, however, she was somewhat in a daze. The grandfather had raised her since young and so knew her very well. He asked warmly, "Why? Are you still thinking about that incident?" Within the family clan, his granddaughter possessed unmatched talent. Always sensible and never pretentious, she was in fact more hard-working than others. Since childhood, she displayed excellent skills that surpassed even her father's and was regarded by the clan as the next generation's leader. The whole clan was pleased with her and all the seniors adored her greatly. The old man was deeply proud of his granddaughter's achievements. In his eyes, she was perfect, but the only thing that worried him was her pride. Like her father, she had never experienced any setbacks. But the old man had plenty of experience. He understood that there were many hidden talents in this world, and there would always be a higher mountain. No matter how outstanding his granddaughter, someone out there would be better. And this was exactly what happened. When he saw the marks on his granddaughter's neck that day, he received a shock and a fear that still lingered. If her opponent used just a little more strength, she would have died on the spot. Then, he quickly realized that her expression was somewhat off. This setback must have been far greater for her than he had expected. To him it was nothing, but he knew Xuanhuan needed more time to process since her life had been smooth sailing so far. If he knew the truth of the matter, he would have ripped Ai Hui into pieces. No, Xuanhuan lowered her head and continued eating. Seeing her like that, the old man could not help but laugh. "Why do you think you lost?" He knew from experience that avoiding the problem wouldn't benefit the youngsters. Xuanhuan paused, still holding on to the spoon. She was stumped by his question. 3 days had passed yet she was still deeply ashamed and resentful. All she could think of was how to find that damned fellow and dismember his body into a million pieces. Although she was no fool, her anger had blinded her. Hearing her grandfather's reminder, she immediately addressed what she neglected so far. The opponent was very familiar with blind battling. As the details from that battle replayed in her mind, Xuanhuan's expression became solemn. Since the incident, this was her first time recalling it without falling into a blind rage. The old man laughed silently, guiding her along. What else? Rich battle experience, fast reflexes, unfeeling, knew how to utilize his advantage. Once Xuanhuan regained her cool, she displayed powerful insights. She mumbled to herself, "Come to think of it, he must have sensed my presence and location right from the start, unlike me who couldn't detect his movements. He was an expert in blind battling, able to fight well in the dark." He chose a close-quarters combat style which in the darkness was ideal. It forced me into a passive position without space to maneuver at all. By doing so, I couldn't display my numerous techniques while he could unleash his full powers. The old man listened carefully, knowing that he only needed to hear her out. He deliberately allowed me to struggle to expedite my energy consumption. Cunning. His elemental energy doesn't seem very strong since he didn't engage it from start to finish, so I had no way of confirming his level. Listening to her, the old man responded, "If he defeated you without engaging his elemental energy, he is definitely skillful." Very. Also, like me, he must have been wearing a suppression bracelet. Xuanhuan didn't refute his statement. She thought for a bit before adding, "When he was locking me in, I utilized arching fish back, but could not break free." For the first time, the old man lost his composure. "He blocked your arching fish back without using elemental energy. Was he old?" Arching fish back was an ingenious technique used to struggle free. It emulated a fish's reaction when startled, full of explosive strength. The old man was quite shocked by the fact that the opponent actually managed to suppress her arching fish back without using elemental energy. "Aha," Xuanhuan gravely nodded. He had exceedingly strong murderous intent. "Originally I planned on using arching fish back to break free to remove the suppression bracelet, but it failed. However, he shouldn't be very old or else he wouldn't have attacked for 50,000 yuan." Thinking back, she couldn't help but respect him. As a girl, immobilization was more disadvantageous. As such, she was taught arching fish back at a very young age, and she spent a lot of energy mastering this technique to the point that it was now a part of her. But even she could not maintain control over the burst energy of arching fish back. Suppressing arching fish back without elemental energy and not too old. "It must be a student then," the old man exclaimed in admiration. "Looks like there's an amazing talent among the new batch of students this year. I wonder who he is, and why haven't I heard of him? Grandfather, you must investigate carefully for me." Xuanhuan shook his arm and pleaded, "I will not take this lying down. We must battle once more in the open, no tricks." The old man laughed loudly. Okay. How could I reject Xuanhuan's request? Clearly Xuanhuan intended to erase her previous humiliation, but it was acceptable for youngsters to hit a snag due to their zealousness. Moreover, he was very curious about this young man who suddenly appeared and overpowered his granddaughter. Interesting. Xuanhuan was overjoyed upon hearing the good news. If grandfather was willing to help, that damned fellow would definitely be unable to escape. Wait and see. I will not let you off. A dangerous aura flashed across her eyes. The old man noticed her expression. Having gone through the ups and downs of life, he certainly knew what she was thinking. He muttered, "He held you down without engaging his elemental energy. I'm afraid his skill surpasses yours. You have to be careful." Xuanhuan raised her head, burning passion in her eyes. "Xuanhuan will surely strive hard." The old man was somewhat surprised. This was his first time seeing her with such an exuberant fighting spirit. Looks like this failure was a major setback for her, the old man thought cheerily. At this point, Ai Hui did not realize the trouble that 50,000 yuan brought upon him as he was attending his introductory lesson. The sunlight rays entered through the windows, shining onto his desk and the floor, making even the dust particles visible. They could be seen drifting lazily in the air. The school was empty except for 6 people. Very few were required to attend this introductory class. Whether they hailed from the old territory or the Avalon of 5 Elements, most young children had already been exposed to the basics. Teacher Dong stood on the podium radiating passion and flinging spittle everywhere. He talked about the countless years of planning and preparation as well as manpower that went into the Avalon of 5 Elements. With cultivators from different sects aiming towards the same goal, the Avalon today was stable and beginning to infiltrate the wilderness. He also mentioned the Avalon's ability to now proceed from defense to a counter-attacking phase and so on. Unlike the other students who were dozing off, Ai Hui was enjoying his lesson. He had previously dabbled in swordplay manuals, but his knowledge about the Avalon's history came mainly from gossiping master elementalists in the wilderness. Talking about history was Teacher Dong's favorite pastime. He spent more than half of his class time on it with very little focus on the basics of training. For what purpose was this messy history lesson given, and what did it have to do with them? The students privately called this the saliva class. They detested wasting their time on such things, but the teacher in charge of their basic training class was Teacher Dong. Moreover, he was known for his bad temper. If anyone who skipped his classes dared to consult him about training, he wouldn't even bother acknowledging their presence. Who asked them to have zero understanding of the basics? Needless to say, students who came from the Avalon of 5 Elements knew the basics. Those who were properly homeschooled went straight into the advanced classes while others were placed into the intermediate classes. Even students from the old territory received training from a young age. While the different environments contributed to the disparity in skills between them and the students from the Avalon, the former did not have many problems dealing with the theoretical aspects. Survival was always the strongest motivation for change. After thousands of years of progress, the 5 elemental energies had already become widely used. Unfortunately, this made the number of students who had to start from the very basics like Ai Hui pathetically few. A person had to lower his head when living under someone else's roof. Teacher Dong talked non-stop for a long time. When he finally started on the topic of training, the other students became much more enthusiastic. Unfortunately, Teacher Dong's passion lied only in imparting history. Without any interest in explaining the formation of elemental energy, he ended the class after only half an hour. In fact, by the time Ai Hui finished reflecting on the information gained from class, he was already gone. Unlike the students who were aggrieved, Ai Hui felt overjoyed from the enlightening lesson. After 3 years in the wilderness, he became capable and experienced, never backing down in the face of danger. In this, he stood out amongst the many laborers around him, gaining the trust of master elementalists and even having the few kind-hearted ones impart a skill or two. Danger lurked in every corner of the wilderness, however, and could appear at any time. Under such circumstances, no one was willing to patiently and systematically educate him on training routines. 3 years later, he had learned many skills, but they were all practical moves, fragmented and incomplete. While he fell behind theoretically, he gained much experience from real combat, and in this aspect, none of his classmates could compare. In addition, he was good at analytical thinking and reflection, or else he would never have been able to create the sword embryo. Despite the simple and scattered knowledge he had accumulated in the wilderness, he spent countless hours contemplating each and every piece of information. Yet due to a lacking foundation, his learning produced limited returns, accumulating a number of questions that he had been puzzling over. During Teacher Dong's short lesson, he taught little about the definite methods to train and more on the theories relevant to elemental energy, which was precisely the area Ai Hui fell behind in. Chapter 10. The Society of Excellence. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Translator. Irene. Editor. Lease elemental energy was nothing uncommon. During the early cultivation era, it was heavily studied but not utilized as widely. Due to spiritual forces more abundant and active nature, it was easier to use than elemental energy. In fact, the ample production of spiritual force suppressed the generation of elemental energy, and so the study of elemental energy was mostly limited to small sections. It was only in the wilderness where the spiritual force was thin that elemental energy could dominate. It had to be said that the cultivation world was favored by nature, as if the heavens had blessed the people with abundant spiritual force that covered the land. For a long time, almost every cultivator held themselves upright with pride, assuming their cultivation world as the core of the world. Yet they failed to take into consideration the living environment of the wilderness. Gradually, the spiritual force became thinner, taking everyone by surprise. As though the foundation of the cultivation system, once the spiritual force disintegrated, the resplendent cultivation world collapsed as well. Millions of years later, the wilderness neglected by the cultivation world became their undefeatable enemy. The elders who were forced into a corner frantically searched for a new source of power, and the ones who taught them best were their enemies, the dire beasts and barbarians. Under these strenuous circumstances, elemental energy was explored and expanded. However, it was the cultivators with their accumulated wisdom from over millions of years that quickly created their own system of 5 elemental energies. As the theories developed, the system stabilized and the Avalon of 5 elements gradually became stronger as well. Metal, wood, water, fire, and earth were the 5 basic elements that made up all living things. When the 5 elements were stable in nature, they formed matter. When they were active in nature, they formed the 5 elemental energies. In the existing theory, there were no observable differences between the 5 types of elemental energies outside of their different forms. Rather than existing as separate entities, they simultaneously transformed and suppressed one another, becoming a perfect cycle. This was also the reason why 5 elements usually existed simultaneously instead of alone, and why the natural matters had complicated properties. Teacher Dong taught only the most foundational reasonings that were obvious to most people who would find the lesson dull and useless. Nevertheless, to Ai Hui, it explained many of the questions that puzzled him. He was most familiar with swordplay from countless manuals, be it traditional or unorthodox. However, without the foundational spiritual force, these things had no value at all. In fact, if the sword embryo didn't germinate within 3 years, any hope of future growth would be lost. Still, it was undeniable that flipping through the countless sword manuals did expand Ai Hui's horizons. The ancient swordsmanship theories had been developed maximally to be profound and wide-ranging, as he had displayed in the wilderness. His operational styles were quite different from the others, moving even the most skillful masters to wonder. It was not by luck that he came out of the wilderness alive. His current fragmented knowledge was slowly starting to make more sense. This excited him because in the past, he had some vague ideas, but now he realized that they were not impossible to achieve. He restrained his restlessness, however, as it was not time yet. He needed more knowledge. Coming to the induction ground was the right decision to make. Just from the first lesson, he had already gained so much which came as a pleasant surprise, and he looked forward to the other lessons. The days of attending class were simple yet enriching, as beautiful as the sunlight. He especially cherished the first lesson. For someone like him with a mediocre aptitude, such an opportunity did not come easily. Like a sponge, he greedily absorbed any nutrients available. Teacher Dong's introductory course was very short with only 10 lessons, but Ai Hui did not want them to end. Despite his packed schedule, he realized that only Teacher Dong's class involved the theoretical aspect of elemental energy formation. Teachers from other classes imparted either practical skills or the specific methods to train. Very few were like Teacher Dong who focused on the logic within. Perhaps they felt that for the new students, learning how to train was sufficient. By now Ai Hui had more or less gotten used to the student life in Central Pine City. He didn't feel the same agitation he once did when standing in front of the induction ground entrance. Studying in the city was relaxing and rules were flexible. For any class, as long as he met the requirements to a certain standard, attendance became optional. However, he still had a class he was required to attend with the classmates from his first day, and in charge of it was the very same teacher Su. Everyone had different skill levels and so picked different classes. It was usually difficult to come across one another, and it was only in homeroom that he got to meet these classmates. Except no one was paying Ai Hui any attention. Most of them probably didn't even remember his name anymore since a mediocre and quiet student like him had no presence. Seeing that everyone was present, Teacher Su began. I called you guys over this time to tell you about the Society of Excellence. Upon hearing the words, Society of Excellence, the students from the Avalon of Five Elements became excited, whereas those from the Old Territory looked puzzled. Society of Excellence is a club that selects gifted students with outstanding skills and potential. Not only will there be specialized teachers to guide them in the training process, the lessons will also be put into practice. For example, you'll be involved in the school's operation or spar with students from other cities and so on. You will even have the chance to enter the wilderness with the teachers to experience its conditions. The students, thrilled at the thought of visiting the wilderness, started chattering. In their eyes, the wilderness was mysterious and full of the unknown. Moreover, with the teachers' company, safety was not an issue. They started to desire the opportunity to see for themselves what the wilderness was all about. In the sea of excited students, Ai Hui alone was indifferent since he had no desire to join this club. Having guidance from the teachers didn't sound bad, but at this point in time, it was more important for him to accumulate ample elemental energy to activate his natal residence. As for the wilderness, he had stayed there long enough. It was nauseating for him. Seeing the enthusiastic faces, Teacher Su smiled. Of course, the selection process is strict for you guys who just entered the induction ground not too long ago. According to the criterias from previous years, you'll need to have activated at least 2 palaces. The students howled in grief. Following this standard, only 3 to 5 students qualified. As for those who still had a chance, their eagerness bled through, unable to be hidden. This is the minimum criteria, but it's not impossible. Everyone should give it a try, Teacher Su encouraged before continuing. As for how to be chosen, have a look, and you'll know. All I want to say is that our city has prepared rewards for those who are chosen. They'll distribute valuable resources that would be advantageous to your training. Work hard, everyone. Xuanhuan, distribute these materials. Ai Hui had seen Xuanhuan, the strongest student in his class, that first day by the school entrance. He could tell from his luxurious clothes that he came from a rich family. Towards the society, Ai Hui remained indifferent. He reckoned that the reward would be pretty good but not worth the hassle, which made it unappealing to him. Plus, his skills were still lacking. His train of thought shifted to training. Central Pine City's training environment was superior, almost like heaven. As he carefully planned his training, Xuanhuan, who was distributing the materials, passed Ai Hui without stopping. He then mockingly said, "You don't need this since you don't even know the basics yet." Ai Hui was confused. Xuanhuan's hostility was uncalled for. Plus. How childish. Sure family, are you sure there are only 6 of them? Xuanhuan did not speak loudly, but the temperature of the whole hall seemed to have dropped by over 10 degrees. All of the servants and bodyguards quivered. The head of the city branch paled, responding with a trembling voice as his body shivered. Non-stop, I have committed a sin. None of the contestants' names were recorded, and the new batch of students just started school, making it a highly difficult task. Only through rumors from students and neighboring merchants did we manage to find these 6. By now, he was filled with regret. Did he have nothing better to do? Why a blind battle? He practically dug his own grave. Xuanhuan took a deep breath and reined in her emotions. She knew he wasn't at fault, instead, she had been slow to react. If she hadn't been in a daze, she would have easily gotten hold of the information and that damned fellow would not have escaped. You've worked hard. This is not your fault. You did very well, Xuanhuan said in the same cold tone. The middle-aged man teared. Recently, he was placed under unimaginable pressure recently. The investigation hit a dead end, and he was on the verge of collapsing. Immediately, the tension within the hall dissipated significantly. Xuanhuan unhurriedly said, "But regarding this, I will need to trouble you further. Everyone present will assist you. Find him at all costs. The middle-aged man was surprised at her determination, but this was not the first time he heard the words, "at all costs," coming out of her mouth. Also considering the nature of her character, he did not think it so surprising anymore. "I will work hard." He dared not guarantee again. After thinking for a bit, he continued, "I have an idea but am unsure if it will work." "What is it?" Xuanhuan asked straightforwardly. "This way of searching is like fishing for a needle in the ocean, but I was thinking that if he could be a threat to you, he must have great skills. I would go so far as to say that within the central Pine City, he would be the cream of the crop. With such abilities, entering the Society of Excellence should not be a problem. Should we narrow our search then, to the members inside?" At the battle, he had seen Xuanhuan but not that mystery man, so he was unaware of the details of their battle. Therefore, only his mistress had the ability to judge that man's capability. After listening to his words, Xuanhuan's eyes brightened. When her subordinate looked at her again, she said without hesitation, "Watch that club. Give the name list to me the moment you have it." "Yes," the subordinate hurriedly agreed. Xuanhuan turned and left quickly. She didn't want to waste any time, instead, all she could think about was training. Her eyes burned with passion and spirit. "Even if you are stronger than me right now, I will not give up. Absolutely. This humiliation. I, Xuanhuan, am going to make you pay for it."